Hello friends, and welcome once again to a Walk in the Garden Bible study. This is part 1 in our study of Genesis chapter 19. And if you were with us for our last lesson, remember we left off chapter 18. We saw where Abraham and the Lord were having their private conversation. The two angels had already left their presence and were journeying towards Sodom. And then we saw where Abraham had pled on behalf of the city of Sodom. And they had, basically the Lord said that if he could just find 10 righteous souls there, that he would not destroy the entire city for their sake. And then we saw where it said the Lord left off from talking with Abraham, and Abraham left and went back to his tent. And that's where we're going to pick it up today in verses 1 through 3 of chapter 19. And here we read, "And there came two angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. And he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly. And they turned in unto him, and entered into his house. And he made them a feast, and he did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat." Now here we see the continuance of the narrative that we left off with in chapter 18. We see the two angels who had departed from their fellowship time they had with Abraham. They had spent a little bit of time there at his tent with the Lord. And then they had left because they said they must needs go towards Sodom. They had a mission to carry out. And so now we saw that they had journeyed to the city of Sodom itself. And what was it they were to carry out? Well, they were carrying out the mandate of the Lord. What was it to do? It was to investigate. It was to inspect. It was to observe. And ultimately it was to find out if the city was as wicked as it was purported to be. And ultimately now, they were going to find out if there was even 10 righteous people in the entire population of Sodom. Just 10 people that were still staying true to the Word of God and serving the Lord and seeking to live in a godly fashion. Just 10 people would preserve the lives and the entire city itself. And it seems that the first person they met as they approached the city was none other than Abraham's nephew Lot. The very one that Abraham was concerned about, the very one that that he really had in his mind and his heart when he was pleading on their behalf, was Lot and his family, because he was concerned for their welfare. And it was Abraham's nephew, the one in particular, that Abraham was greatly concerned about. And why was it? Well, it says because Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. So here's why these angels were met first of all by Lot himself. Because Lot wasn't participating in the wicked things of the day. He wasn't, rubbing shoulders and elbows to elbows with these folks and the evil works they were doing and the unseemly activities they were involved in. But yet he still lived in the city. But in the cool of the eve, he'd come out and he would just hang out at the gate of the city and just observe things that were going on. And so even amongst the heathen that dwelt there, Lot distinguished himself, separated from the rest. This was eventime. It was in the cool of the day. It was this part of time in the town, and it was the time of day when all of this ungodly behavior would be taking place. But Lot would have no part in it. He would not participate. He sat in the gate alone, just as Abraham was sitting in the tent door, just observing, looking, seeking, and possibly seeking for an opportunity to do good. Possibly he was there just to meet any possible strangers that would come past that way, in the hopes of accommodating them and in the hopes of maybe, fellowshipping with them and supplying something they needed, and hopefully help them have a safe journey along their way. And it reminds me of some of these old West towns that we hear accounts of, or maybe you've seen movies and recounting their things. Well, it was kind of a very similar situation. Some of these rambunctious towns out in the Old West would get very, almost violent, and they had all kind. Some of them had 8 to 10 saloons in one very small town, and so you had all of these outlaws that would come into town, and guys that were just looking to have a good time, so to speak, and get involved in all kinds of gambling activities and other things that were, drinking, and all these things were going on. And then, of course, that resulted in other types of behavior, and they became just a very dangerous place to live in. But not only that, it was very dangerous if somebody came from out of town that was unsuspecting. Then if they weren't careful, they could get caught up in the clutches of these guys and possibly be robbed or injured or murdered or whatever the case is. And so if somebody was there and they knew about this and they were being observant and being concerned, then they would go out of their way to accommodate these folks and make sure that they got taken to the hotel safely, make sure they got accommodated, make sure they were, put up for the night and in a place of safety and a refuge, you might say. So here was Lot sitting at the gate looking for some good news, perhaps hoping for a special or a social visitation. And he was also sensitive, just as Abraham was, he was sensitive to the Lord's presence. When he sees these angels approaching, what does it say? It says he rose up to meet them and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. So he was aware, and he'd been privy to, and just as Abraham was taught and brought up in the things of the Lord and the ways of the Lord, so it was with Lot. And he recognized these men for who they were. And so he showed proper respect by going out of his way to not only meet them, but also to bow and show reverence and just show respect for them. He was fully aware that this was another divine encounter. And there was something different about these two men. There was an aura about them that discerned them that they were a men of the Lord. And as a good steward would do, what did he do next? He offered to put them up for the night. He says, he saw them, he rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and he said, "Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night." He offered to put them up for the night. He offered to let them use his facilities to wash their feet, to just renew their strength, to rest for the evening. And not only that, but he was also offering to make them something to eat. So once again, he wanted not only to have fellowship with them, but also to supply their needs and hopefully get them safely on their way. And so that's what, and it wasn't because he got a phone call from Abraham. I mean, they didn't have a carrier pigeon that dropped him a message that said, "Hey, these two men are coming." We didn't read anything about Abraham sending out a messenger ahead of them to let Lot know that they were coming his way. I mean, I suppose that's a possibility. It could have happened, but most likely from the narrative here, it was just the fact that Lot recognized them for who they were. And therefore, he gave the same response that Abraham gave, as a righteous person would do. So he offered to put them up in a safe, protected environment, and what did he do? He extended them a personal invitation. He says, "Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant, my house." Come on into my house. And not just tarry for a moment, but tarry here all night. You can spend the night. I'll give you lodging. I'll give you a place to stay. You can wash up, and you'll have a fine meal under the roof of my household. And then you can rise up early in the morning fully refreshed and be on your ways and get out of this city basically as quick as you can. Lot was well aware of the dangers and the evil that could come upon them, especially as newcomers to the town. He wanted to offer accommodation, but he also really ultimately wanted to get them off the street as quickly and as soon as possible. especially before the full darkness came upon them. And he wanted them to rise up early and get an early start before anybody else would rise up and notice possibly that they were even there. And so just like his uncle, we see that Lot's desire was to provide hospitality. It was to provide accommodations and refreshments. And it was to provide a comfortable resting place for his guests. And so he extends the overnight invitation. He says, "Ye shall tarry all night. Gentlemen, feel free to lodge here tonight. Get well rested, and at the crack of dawn, you can be on your way refreshed and nourished." And so next we're going to notice their response. What do they say? They say, "Well, no thank you, Lot. But, nay, we'll abide in the street all night. We're okay. But thanks for the offer, but no, we're fine. We're going to stay out here and just kind of do what we're here for, and that's to observe what is taking place." But Lot wouldn't hear of it. He was concerned for their safety. He was concerned for their welfare. What does it say? It says he pressed upon them greatly. He urged them. He just wanted to motivate them to take him up on his offer. He pleaded with them to stay on. His motives were honorable. First, we can notice that he would by no means expose themselves to the perils. He just wasn't going to have it. He wasn't going to have them, he wasn't going to worry about it, but he also just felt that he would, since he had met them, that they were now his responsibility. Not only to provide for them, but to secure their safety. And he would not expose them to the perils, to the corruptions, and the dangers of lodging in the streets of Sodom. Secondly, he was also desirous of their company and their conversation because he recognized them for who they were. And just as Abraham did, he was hoping maybe to gain some further wisdom, some further knowledge, maybe some further instruction, and just be able to fellowship with them and maybe gain a blessing from the Almighty. It was refreshing also just to actually have two men of God in his house that he could identify with. I mean, there was nobody else. There were no churches there. There were no chapels. There were no temples. There were no altars made unto the Lord. There was nobody calling out on behalf of the Lord. There was no prayers being given. And there was nobody really in the entire city that he or his family could associate with on a daily basis. There was no sweet fellowship time. He had severed himself from that fellowship by removing himself from the presence of Abraham. I mean, obviously they separated, and perhaps there was a time or two, occasionally when they might meet up or they might, have lunch together or something. We don't know, but he had separated himself from the presence of the Lord, and he was in isolation. And there was nobody there that wanted to hear what he had to say. He wasn't having a positive impact or an influence on the city because they would have nothing to do with it. They would basically just shun him. So it was actually refreshing to actually have two men of God, two people he could identify with, two people that had the same mindset, the same passion in his house. It was going to be a sweet time of fellowship and getting to know them and just some conversation. They had some commonality. He could surely gain some insight and spiritual renewal from them in some form or fashion. And so when the angels finally submitted to his request, he makes them a feast, which once again includes the unleavened bread. And what does it say? It says, "And they did eat." And the two things we thusly notice in both instances of Abraham and Lot are that God's people are caring people. And because they are caring people, they are generous people as well. And this should be the trademarks of a modern day Christian, and that is to be what? It's to be truly, not just as a show, not just as an outward expression, but from a heart that truly is concerned about being caring and generous. And all of these attributes that we've seen in both Abraham and Lot are in complete opposition of what we know about the people and the citizenship of Sodom. You know, in Ezekiel chapter 16 and verse 49 to 50, because we hear a lot about, you know, the evils of Sodom and the wickedness, and they were doing all these unseemly things and so forth and so on. Well, what were the iniquities of Sodom? Well, here it tells us in Ezekiel 16, 49 and 50, the Bible says, "Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom." What do we see first? Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw good. And that word haughty is someone who lifts themselves up, who elevates themselves, and it's basically elevating themselves with pride. They're proud of them. You know, the Bible tells us that God despises and hates a proud look. And we've talked about that. But haughtiness is just being lifted up with pride. They were proud of themselves. They were proud of their deeds. They were proud of who they were. They thought they were above, rising above. They were rising above helping those in need. You know, they were, if there was somebody in need that had a want, or maybe had a medical infirmity, or maybe had, you know, something, some kind of calamity that come up, well, their attitude was, so what? They deserve that. I'm better than that. I'm too good to help those people out. They don't deserve my help. I am all about myself. And they were lifted up with pride. And they were even above serving the Lord. They were too proud to serve the Lord. And that was one of the trademarks, or is one of the trademarks of the devil, is being lifted up with pride. And because Satan had that iniquity of pride in his heart, then that's what caused him to rebel against God, and, you know, we know the rest of the story. And because of that, that is a trademark. When one gets lifted up with pride, that's a trademark of the devil. That's one of the devil's, the hallmarks of the devil's children. And then the second thing here, it says that they committed abominations. Well, abominations covers a wide variety of things, but basically you could denote it as meaning disgusting things. They were committing disgusting things before the Lord, things that, and you could think about things in our society today that may disgust you as a Christian. And maybe one of the most obvious things in America, well, pretty much worldwide, I guess, is the act of abortion. I mean, that should disgust the heart of a Christian. To think that somebody is so lifted up with pride that they have the audacity to take within themselves that they feel like they have the right to judge whether a person deserves to live or to die. And that's what it is. That's a person. It may be an unborn person, but it's a person. And again, we've discussed this before, but when that new organism is formed at the moment of conception, a new organism is formed. What is that new organism? That's a new life form. And that new life form is a human. It's a human being. And so when does life start? It starts at the moment of conception, because when those two items get together, then it is no longer two, but now it's become one. And that one is a new, there is no life form there if they're separated, because the DNA has to be completed. The completion comes when those two things meet, and at that moment, now they've formed a new life form, has begun. And at that moment, a human being has begun. And so it's disgusting to think that someone could do that so blatantly and flippantly, and just do it in a way that it's, you know, they just see it as a mechanical operation, or like it has no impact or bearing on anything. And it's because of the fact that they're lifted up with pride. They're above concerning themselves for the things of the Lord. They're above concerning themselves from any kind of thought of retribution or thought of judgment. They just don't believe it's going to happen. They don't believe it. They've taken on the ways of the world. The devil's confused them. The devil has deceived them into thinking that it's an acceptable thing. And he does it subtly by convincing them that it isn't really a human being until it actually is, outside the womb. And that's a misnomer. That's a mistake, and it's a grave error. And so that's just one of many things that should be disgusting. And if it's something that disgusts the Lord, then as one of the Lord's creations, out of one of the Lord's children, it should disgust us just equally as well. And it's unfortunate that we've become so impervious to so many things nowadays because we've just become immune to them, you might say, or become disillusioned with things that used to be considered gravely sinful, and now we've allowed things to become to where we're just numb to those things being evil and wicked. And it's not a good thing, because one small thing leads into allowing for more major things. Well, with that, we're going to leave off. That's verses 1 through 3. We'll pick it up in our next lesson with verses 4 through 11. And now we've seen where Lot has taken in these men of God, these two angels. They've committed themselves to spend the night there at his household. But it's not going to be able to turn out the way that Lot thinks it's going to, because we're going to see some major things come in his path in this next few verses. And we'll see that in our next lesson. We hope to see you then. Have a great day.